Hey guys, today we're going to put together this flat vector UI design. First we're going to go through and do some vector workflows in Illustrator, then put together the UI layout in Figma, and finally assemble it all in HTML and CSS. So here's the design that we're using for inspiration that we generated in Midjourney, and here's the prompt we used to create it. Before we get to Illustrator, I want to isolate the header image in Photoshop and also use the patch tool to clean it up a little because there's some text and other little elements we don't want in there when we're tracing. Then we can just copy and paste it into Illustrator. So the quickest way to vectorize an image is to use image trace. So you can go up to the window menu and open the image trace panel. We're going to switch the mode to color and then click preview so we can see the results of our changes. The settings you use for your image trace are really going to depend upon your image. So if you unfold the advanced properties, there's a lot of different values you can play around with, like the paths, noise, and corners, just to adjust it to get the right look. You'll also want to play with the colors and the palette, but just to try and make sure that it simplifies the shapes but also retains the quality of the image that you're looking for. Then we just save it out as SVG. And there's some properties here you might want to play around with if you're really interested in how it generates the SVG. Like you can specify if you want CSS inline as attributes or in a style element. You can also preview your SVG code. One property I want to call out here is decimal places. So if you're having issues where there's white space or lines between your vector shapes, you might want to increase this up to something like 10 to get better results. So vector tracing is great, but sometimes you can't get the exact results you want. Sometimes you want gradients in it, or you want to be able to just control the shapes more granularly than you can get with the vector trace. And in this instance, it's better to actually just draw it and trace everything out yourself and create your vectors. This is a bit more tedious. You have to kind of go through and trace all the paths and recreate all the gradients, but you can get better results from this as well. Some tips that I like to use is I do all my drawing on a separate layer above the art that I'm tracing. When you do this, if you hold Option and click the eyeball of the layer, it'll just convert it to outline so you can actually see the shape that you're tracing underneath. Lean heavy on the color picker tool to get the right colors. And again, the level of detail and how granular you want to get is really up to you and the kind of look you're going for with your vector art. I even went so far as to create some custom brushes so I could add some lines to the mountains and then adjust their opacity so that they blend through a little bit. So now we're ready to head into Figma. So we just drag and drop our image in. We'll create an iPhone UI frame and then drag our header in and press R for the rect tool so that we can drag out a rect to create the gradient for the background. So we use the color picker tool just to match the colors exactly from our background gradient. Then we hit the R tool again to draw a rectangle for our footer. Then using the same tool, we're going to trace out one of these panels and adjust the border radius to match and use the color picker to pick out the colors. So we're going to turn this into a reusable component by right-clicking and choosing Create Component. That way, if we want to make changes to it, it will apply to all the instances. Then we just populate it with the content, the text, and these pill shapes. Then we can hit Option Drag to create instances of this component. One thing I want to point out that I would have done differently is I apply the drop shadow here to the component itself when I should have done it to the rectangle inside of it. This way I could just copy the CSS off the rectangle instead of copying the CSS of the whole component, which includes all its contents. Now I'm going to create a frame out of this group by right-clicking and choosing Frame Selection. You can also hit Option Command G. Then we do it again, only resizing this frame's width to fit the width of our app. Then we go up to prototype mode and change overflow to horizontal. Now if we preview it, you can see we can actually horizontally swipe this carousel back and forth. Then we just go through and do the same thing to our second carousel. Then we're just going to go through and edit the component to match the design a little bit closer. And then we're going to update these buttons. So we'll hit R, draw a rect, and then adjust the border radius here and use the color picker tool to match the color gradient inside of it. And then add a drop shadow. Then we just duplicate that and do the same thing for the other button. And here's our working prototype. One other thing I wanted to point out is if you're interested in using raster images instead of vector, you can actually upscale them directly inside of Figma using this plugin I created called Dreamer. It uses the Stability AI API, but all you can have to do is mask something and then click upscale and it'll generate a up-res version of it. So now we're just going to build out the HTML and CSS. I'm going to use ChatGPT to describe the layout so we can see how far it gets us in just generating the HTML and CSS for this site. So this actually did pretty good. All we really need to do now is populate it and style it. So let's go through and do that. Now I'm going to use GSAP's Draggable plugin to create the horizontal scrolling so I can just drag those carousel items back and forth. So here's our end result, our vector art website with horizontal scrolling panels using GSAP's Draggable.